Hello kids, today you are with KIDSLAND. We welcome you to our KIDSLAND family.
Today we are going to learn our third lesson about the Abraham, the father of the faithful. So now let's learn about the Abraham.
Abraham, the father of the faithful. The people who lived 4,000 years ago were very much like children who easily forget. They told their children about the great flood, but nearly all forgot to tell them of the good God who is the Father of us all, whom we should always love and obey. Yet there is always one, if not more, who remembers God and keeps his name alive in the world. Abram had tried to do right, though there was no Bible in the world then, and no one better than himself to help him but God. And one day he called Abram and told him to go away from his father's house into another country, a land that I will show thee, said the Lord, and I will make of thee a great nation. He also made Abram a wonderful promise, in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. He meant that sometime the Savior should be born among Abram's children's children, and that he should be the Savior of all the nations of the earth. Abram did just what God told him to do. He took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his nephew, and some servants, and cows, and sheep, and camels, and asses, and went into the land of Canaan. When they rested at night, Abram and Lot set some sticks in the ground, and covered them with skins for a tent. And nearby they made an altar, where Abram offered a sacrifice, for that was the only way they could worship God when the earth was young. Abram went down into Egypt when there was a lack of food in Canaan, but he came back to Bethel, where he made the altar before and worshipped God there. He was very rich, for his cattle and sheep had grown into great herds and flocks, though he had sold many in Egypt for silver and gold and food. Abram and Lot moved often, for their flocks and herds soon ate up the grass. Then they rolled up the tents, and loaded the camels and asses, and went where the grass was thick and fresh. They could easily live in tents, for the country was warm. But Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen sometimes quarreled. And so Abram spoke kindly to Lot, and told him to take his servants, and flocks, and herds, and go where the pastures were good, and he would go the other way. So they parted, and Lot went to the low plains of the Jordan, but Abram went to the high plains of Mamre in Hebron. And there he built another altar to the Lord, who had given him all that country, to him and to his children forever. There were warlike people in Canaan, and once when they had carried off Lot from Sodom, Abram took his servants and herdsmen and went out to fight. He had more than 300 men, and they took Lot away from the enemy, and brought him back to Sodom. It was here that Abram met a wonderful man, who was both a king and a priest. His name was Melchizedek, and he brought Abram bread and wine, and blessed him there. After this, God spoke to Abram one evening, and promised that he should have a son. And then while Abram stood outside his tent, with the great sky thick with stars above him, God promised him that his children's children should grow to be as countless as the stars. That was hard to believe, but Abram believed God always and everywhere. Still no child came to Abram and Sarai, and Abram was almost 100 years old. But God spoke to him again, and told him that he should be the father of many nations. Abraham was sitting in his tent one hot day, when 3 men stood by him. They were strangers, and Abraham asked them to rest beneath the tree, and bathe their feet while he brought them food. So Sarah made cakes, and a tender calf was cooked, and these with butter and milk were set before the men. But they were not men of this world, they were angels, and they had come to tell Abraham and Sarah once more that their little child was sure to come. Then the angels went away, but one of them, who must have been the Lord himself in an angel's form, stopped to tell Abraham that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, because the people who lived there were so very wicked. And Abraham prayed him to spare them if even 10 good men could be found in them, for he remembered that Lot lived in Sodom. But the Lord never forgets. The 2 angels went to Sodom and stayed with Lot until morning, when they took him and all his family outside the city. And then the Lord said to him, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain.
The 3 strangers, and the Lord hid them in the little town of Zor, while a great rain of fire fell upon the wicked cities of the plain, until they became a heap of ashes. Only Lot's wife looked back to see the burning cities, and she became a pillar of salt. The next morning, when Abraham looked from Hebron down toward the cities of the plain, a great smoke was rising from them like the smoke of a furnace. At last the Lord's promise to Abraham and Sarah came true. A little son was born to them, and they called him Isaac. They were very happy, for though Abraham was 100 years old, no child had ever been sent them. When he was about a year old, they made a great feast for him, and all brought gifts and good wishes. Yet the little lad Ishmael, the son of Hagar, Sarah's servant, mocked at Isaac. Sarah was angry, and told her husband that Hagar and her boy must be sent away. So he sent them out with only a bottle of water and a loaf of bread, for God had told Abraham to do as Sarah wished him to do, and he would take care of little Ishmael, and make him the father of another nation. When the water was gone, and the sun grew very hot, Poor Hagar laid her child under a bush to die, for she was very lonely and sorrowful, while she hid her eyes and wept, saying, "Let me not see the death of the child." She heard a voice out of heaven telling her not to be afraid.
Hagar in the desert, arise, lift up the lad, said the voice, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes to see a well of water near. Then she filled the empty bottle and gave the boy a drink, and God took good care of them ever after, though they lived in a wilderness. Ishmael grew up to be an archer and became the father of the Arabs, who still live in tents as Ishmael did. But the Lord let a strange trial come to the little lad Isaac also. His father loved and obeyed God. But there were heathen people around them who worshipped idols and sometimes killed their own children as a sacrifice to these idols. Abraham brought the best of his lambs and cattle to offer to the Lord. But one day the Lord told Abraham to take his only son Isaac and offer him upon a mountain called Moriah as a burnt sacrifice to God. Abraham had always obeyed God and believed his word, and now, though he could not understand, he rose up early in the morning and took his young son, with 2 servants, and an ass loaded with wood, to the place of which God had told him. They were 3 days on the journey. But at last they came to the high place, where the city of Jerusalem was afterward built, and to the very rock upon which the temple was built long afterward, with its great altar and holy.
On Mount Moriah, Abraham had left the young men at the foot of the mount, and went with Isaac to the great rock on the top of the mount. "My father," said Isaac, "where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering," said his father, still obeying God and believing his word, that Isaac should be the father of many nations. Abraham made an altar of stones, and bound Isaac and laid him upon it. But when his hand was lifted to offer up the boy, the Lord called to him from heaven. "Lay not thine hand upon the lad," said the voice, "for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thine only son from me." Then Abraham turned and saw a ram with its twisted horns caught in the bushes, and he offered it to the Lord instead of his son. How glad and grateful Abraham must have been that morning, when he came down the mountain, with Isaac walking beside him. To think that he had still obeyed God when it was hard to do so. Abraham was an old man when Sarah died. They had lived together a long lifetime, and he mourned for her many days. He bought a field close by the oak-shaded plain of Mamre in Hebron, and there in a rocky cave he buried her. He was called the Prince of God by the Canaanites because he lived a true, faithful life. A few years after, he also went to God, and his body was laid beside Sarah's in the cave tomb. Ishmael came up from the south country to mourn with Isaac at the burial of their father, the friend of God and father of the faithful.
Okay, kids, this concludes our 3rd lesson. We will meet again next week with a new lesson.
If you are not connected to our website, connect to it now. Through that, we provide you with a daily prayer as well as kids' blog posts. Subscribe now if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel. We come to you every day with new things.
You who are viewing this are a member of our KIDSLAND family.